Fake news is on the agenda of every major global news organization. In the aftermath of the US presidential election, many people highlighted the role of fake news in helping to sustain the momentum of right-wing populism that brought Trump to power. These anti-information farms, which systematically deceive people, are not always directly political. Fake news can refer to websites deliberately set up to produce false headlines about celebrities dying or politicians resigning in order to get advertising revenue. It can refer to satirical pieces that are taken too literally, and it can refer to random tweets that go viral because they support the agenda of right-wing websites like Breitbart. A CNN opinion piece warns that fake news is proliferating, is often shared more than real news is, and is harmful. Many untrue stories are believed by the people who post them. Foreign Affairs claimed that during the presidential election, there was a flood of counterfeit posts from fake news sites on social media which were nearly indistinguishable from authentic coin and remain so even in the face of skeptical but impatient fact-checking. The New York Times warns fellow media organizations that it must overcome the threat of fake news. It cites a range of false stories that went viral, including the Clinton campaign's pollster, Jill Bennison, wrote a secret memo detailing plans to salvage Hillary Clinton's candidacy by launching radiological attack to halt voting. The Clinton campaign senior strategist John Podesta practiced an occult ritual involving various bodily fluids. There is a trail of supposedly suspicious deaths of myriad Clinton foes. Martin Barron, executive editor of The Washington Post, complained to the New York Times, "If you have a society where people can't agree on basic facts, how do you have a functioning democracy?" This is already questionable, indicative of an authoritarian animus behind the fake news frenzy. There is always, in any democratic society, some degree of disagreement over what the facts are. Only in a police state can an artificial consensus be assured. And if the arbiters of these basic facts were to be the established authorities, we would never have been permitted to disagree with the claim that, for example, Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Nonetheless, there is a real problem, and it is perhaps worse than Barron realizes. The Guardian recently reported the ominous outcome of a fake news story, alleging that Israel had threatened to carry out a nuclear strike on Pakistan. Pakistan's Defense Minister, Khawaja Mohammad Asif, apparently read the article as a genuine threat of a preemptive nuclear strike and took to Twitter to warn Israel that Pakistan is a nuclear state too. But the mainstream fightback has begun. The New York Times offers readers hints on how to destroy the business model of fake news, citing recent cases of shaming companies which advertise on racist, alt-right websites. It says, "A new consumer movement is rising, and activists believe that where votes failed, wallets may prevail. The struggle is about using corporations as shields to protect vulnerable people from bullying and hate crimes." The BBC, meanwhile, in typically patronizing anti-mode, offers a handy user's guide to spotting and reporting fake news, urging readers to ask themselves the following questions about any allegation on social media. Have I heard of the publisher before? Is this the source I think it is, or does it sound a bit like them? Is there more than one piece of evidence for this claim? It then offers step-by-step instructions to reporting fake news to Facebook and Google. The BBC reported on Facebook's fake news crisis, claiming that an unofficial task force had been created by the company to tackle the problem. Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg denied this, but within days admitted that he had a series of proposals to verify news stories that were shared on the website. Facebook has now declared its own war on fake news, preparing to partner with Snopes, factcheck.org, ABC News, and PolitiFact. As CNN reported, the measures inevitably provoked the ire of the far right, who claim that their partners in fact-checking all have records of left-wing partisanship, which suggests that despite what Barron would like to believe, there will never be complete agreement about the facts. But all this raises more questions than answers. Why should we suddenly be awash in fake news? How is this profitable? And is it as new as we think? CNN, in a long analytical piece, argued that people share information not just to inform or even to persuade. It is used as a marker of identity, a way to proclaim your affinity with a particular community. But is fake news all that new? What is the difference between fake news and propaganda? As CBS journalist Ben Swan points out, the US government has just passed a law allowing it to fund and disseminate propaganda under the rubric of countering foreign propaganda from Iran, China, and Russia.
The bill also creates a grant program for NGOs, for think tanks, civil society, and other experts outside government who are, quote, engaged in counter-propaganda related work.
As Swan argues, counter-propaganda turns out to be a convenient label for propaganda.
But isn't that illegal? It was. But no, not anymore, because 3 years ago, wrapped inside the 2013 NDAA, was an amendment that removed the ban on the U.S. government creating propaganda and then showing it to U.S. citizens. That ban, by the way, had been in place since 1948.
In fact, the US government has a long history of this kind of propaganda work, with an often compliant media. As journalist Carl Bernstein reports, the CIA's Operation Mockingbird funded media and cultural outlets, recruited leading journalists to promote the US government's aims. Recently, the propaganda war has been transposed to social media. As The Guardian reported in 2011, the US military is developing false online personalities known to users of social media as sock puppets, which allows individual military personnel to control several fake accounts to produce content favorable to the US. Quite apart from government influence of the news, there is a long history of astroturfing. Cheryl Atkinson, an investigative journalist formerly of CBS, describes the technique wherein
AstroTurf is when political, corporate, or other special interests disguise themselves and publish blogs, start Facebook and Twitter accounts, publish ads, letters to the editor, or simply post comments online.
astroturfing is as old as the internet. Environmental journalist George Monbiot reported back in 2006 on how the tobacco and fossil fuels industry have used fake online personas to pursue their agenda. The PR industry has been in the business of fake news for decades. It was the PR firm Hill & Knowlton which was behind the false claims that Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait were ripping babies out of incubators, thus justifying Bush Sr.'s rush to war. The Observer's Nick Davies wrote of how journalism, cheap, rapidly produced news, was creating a situation wherein press releases produced by companies, lobbies, or think tanks are repackaged as news. For decades, moreover, news has been livened up by being fused with the cult of celebrity and entertainment culture. The product came to be known as infotainment in the 1980s and proliferated with 24/7 cable news networks. There emerged a genre of so-called soft news focused on celebrity scandals, real, fabricated, or embellished by celebrity PR agencies. There also emerged a raft of news personalities such as Larry King and Wolf Blitzer. In a way, fake news is the culmination and fusion of all of these trends: propaganda, journalism, and infotainment. The content is dictated by either propaganda or infotainment. That is, it is either an attempt to derail the national conversation with red herrings, or an attempt to titillate people with supposed celebrity deaths or sex episodes. But the profit model comes from journalism, when all that matters is putting out information cheaply in an eye-catching way to maximize revenues, and doing so as often as possible. The next logical step is fake news. Intriguingly, the media's tone changed entirely when Donald Trump referred to the allegations made against him by CNN and BuzzFeed, implicating him in compromising relations with the Russian deep state, as fake news. Things to think about before calling something fake news, the BBC warned, before pointing out the crucial difference between news that was unverified and news that was fake. Fake news is untrue, whereas unverified news has not yet been proven to be true or false. The problem with this neo-Jesuitical distinction, which avoids the more interesting question of the political economy of news media, is that quite a lot of fake news is unverified until someone proves it is fake. A large number of claims that appear in mainstream outlets turn out like this, particularly in the run-up to a war. What is more, as the Washington Post media columnist pointed out, the term is so vague and semantically loaded that it is actually used quite widely by the far right, such as conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, to attack opinions or ideas that they happen to dislike. As such, she suggested the term should be dropped. But the term was made for moral panic. The author and journalist Evgeny Morozov, writing in The Guardian, pours cold water on this moral panic about fake news, which he says is a cover for authoritarianism and censorship. Their fake news narrative is itself fake. It's a shallow explanation of a complex systemic problem, the very existence of which they still refuse to acknowledge. A moral panic externalizes a real, complex crisis and scapegoats folk devils for it. The complex, systemic problem that Morozov refers to is a crisis of politics and representation, and of the news media, the representation of representation. It has left people starving for better news, real news, and the moral panic about fake news is a way of not noticing that they've been fed garbage for years.